Destiny 2 has come a long way since its launch in 2017, and in this series, we're going to break down every year of the game, covering the good, the bad, and the ugly. But more importantly, we're going to dive deep into what makes Destiny 2 a great game, and how Bungie has learned, adapted, and improved over the years. We'll explore the highs and lows, the challenges and triumphs, and see how each year shaped the game into what it is today. If you're looking for a quick overview of Destiny 2's evolution, check out my last video for a broader perspective. But for now, we're going to go back to the beginning, the launch that started it all, Year 1. Destiny 2 launched on September 6, 2017, and the hype was real. Destiny 1 had grown into something special with the Taken King and Rise of Iron, and fans were eager for the sequel to build on that foundation. Bungie promised a more accessible game, a stronger narrative, and a fresh start, and at first, it seemed like they delivered. Now, not everyone was on board right away. Leading up to the launch, some longtime players were uneasy about starting over. In Destiny 1, Guardians had spent years grinding for god roll weapons, rare armor, and exclusive titles, only to find out that none of it would carry over. Bungie framed this as a necessary reset, a chance for everyone to begin on equal footing, but for many, it felt like losing a part of their journey. Would Destiny 2 offer the same kind of depth and long-term investment that had kept players engaged for thousands of hours, or was this a step backward? Despite the concerns, excitement still ran high. The early gameplay looked smooth, the visuals were stunning, and Bungie's promise of a more structured and rewarding experience gave players hope. If Destiny 2 could build on the best parts of its predecessor while fixing its flaws, this could be the game that truly filled Destiny's potential. The opening mission, Homecoming, was incredible. Right from the start, Bungie made it clear that Destiny 2 was going to be more cinematic, more emotional, and more intense. The tower, our home for years, was under siege, burning as the Cabal's massive warships filled the sky. Zavala summoned his Ward of Dawn to protect fleeing Guardians, Ikora launched herself into battle against overwhelming odds, and Cayde's cocky confidence turned to desperation. For the first time, the Vanguard felt like real people, not just quest givers standing in a social space. The campaign itself was a major step up from Destiny 1's fragmented storytelling. Instead of cryptic grimoire cards or scattered lore entries, the narrative unfolded right in front of us. We weren't just fighting waves of enemies, we were survivors, struggling to reclaim our lost power. The stakes had never been higher. And then there was Dominus Ghaul. From the moment he stepped onto screen, it was clear he was different from any Destiny 1's vague, faceless villains. He had a motive, he had depth. He wasn't just trying to destroy humanity, he wanted to prove that he deserved the Traveler's light, and worst of all, he actually won. The Traveler, silent for centuries, did nothing as Ghaul took away our power and left us broken. For the first time, Guardians weren't the unstoppable force we had always been. We were weak, we were lost, and we had to fight to earn our light back. Now, ultimately, we ended up defeating Ghaul, although not before one of the most badass speeches in video game history.
Death. Explain.
Devotion inspires bravery. Bravery inspires sacrifice. Sacrifice leads to death. So, feel free to kill yourself.
But the campaign made it seem as though Destiny 2 was truly the improvement Bungie had promised. However, once the honeymoon phase ended, the cracks started to show. At first, everything felt fresh. New weapons, new subclasses, and a campaign that actually delivered a cohesive story. But as players reached the endgame, a troubling realization set in. Bungie had stripped away much of what made Destiny 1's long-term grind so engaging. The most immediate problem was the new double primary weapon system. In an attempt to make the game more balanced and approachable, Bungie restructured how weapons worked, forcing players to use two primary weapons instead of a traditional primary, secondary, and heavy loadout. This slowed down combat significantly. Gone were the clutch sniper plays, the quick switch shotgun duels, the ability to counter engagements with a well-placed fusion rifle. Gunfights became drawn-out exchange of bullets, making PvE feel sluggish and PvP feel neutered. And then there were the weapons themselves. In Destiny 1, players could spend weeks hunting down the perfect roll on a gun, knowing that a god roll could completely change how it handled. But Destiny 2 removed random rolls entirely. Every weapon of the same type was identical, which meant once you found a good gun, the grind was effectively over. There was no reason to chase loot anymore. PvP didn't fare much better. Bungie reduced all playlists to strict 4v4 modes, removing the chaotic freedom that had made the Crucible feel so unique. Large-scale battles, fan-favorite modes like 6v6 Control, and the sheer unpredictability of Destiny 1's PvP were gone, replaced with slower, more team-shot-heavy engagements. But the biggest problems? The endgame just wasn't there. Raids and nightfalls were still present, but outside of that, there was little reason to keep playing. There were no meaningful long-term goals, no secret quests, no chase for powerful gear. For a game built around the idea of endless replayability, Destiny 2 felt surprisingly shallow. Destiny 2's in-game activities were supposed to keep players engaged, but instead, they became a point of contention. The Leviathan raid had its fans, but even it was divisive. Unlike the mechanically intricate, combat-heavy raids of Destiny 1, Leviathan leaned more into puzzles and coordination-based mechanics. Some players loved the emphasis on teamwork, while others found it tedious. And with no random rolls or meaningful gear chase, clearing the raid felt more like checking a box than an exciting reward loop. Then there was Trials of the Nine, Bungie's attempt to evolve Trials of Osiris. On paper, it should have been a step forward, a sleek new aesthetic, a fresh social space, and a continued focus on high-stakes PvP. But in execution, the changes to the format and rewards backfired. The shift to 4v4 slowed down matches, making them more about passive team shooting than individual skill. The flawless reward structure felt less enticing, and the mysterious lore surrounding the Nine wasn't enough to keep players invested. Interest plummeted, and what was once one of Destiny 1's most beloved activities became an afterthought. Nightfalls, another in-game staple, also saw a controversial change. Bungie introduced a timer mechanic, forcing players to complete them within a set limit. Instead of intense, high-level challenges that demanded skill and strategy, Nightfalls became a race against the clock. It removed the sense of careful, tactical play that had defined the best Destiny 1 Nightfalls, frustrating players who preferred a more methodical approach. And then, there were faction rallies. Bungie hyped them up as an exciting way to pledge loyalty to a faction and earn powerful rewards, but in reality, they were tedious, repetitive grind with little payoff. Instead of a unique faction gear or meaningful progression, players found themselves mindlessly farming lost sectors to earn tokens. The event quickly became a joke, and by the time Bungie tried to fix it, most players had already stopped caring. Then came Curse of Osiris in December 2017, and this is where things hit rock bottom. Hopes were already low. Players were frustrated with Destiny 2's shallow endgame, and they needed something to bring them back. But instead of a turnaround, Bungie delivered what many consider one of the worst DLCs in Destiny's history. The expansion was short, painfully short. The campaign, centered around the legendary warlock Osiris and the Vex, lasted only a couple hours. And despite all the buildup around Osiris, one of the most hyped characters in Destiny lore, he barely did anything. Instead, players spent most of their time running around the same handful of Mercury-based missions, fighting reskinned enemies, and listening to his ghost, Sagira, explain things. The story was forgettable, and the new patrol zone, Mercury, was the smallest and most lifeless sandbox Destiny had ever seen. But what really pushed players over the edge was the lack of meaningful in-game content. Curse of Osiris added the Infinite Forest, a procedurally generated Vex simulation that sounded promising, but ended up being nothing more than a glorified hallway full of recycled enemies. The new raid layer was a short raid experience, but didn't offer much in the way of rewards or long-term replayability. Worst of all, Bungie locked players out of content they had already paid for. When the DLC raised the level cap, players who didn't purchase Curse of Osiris suddenly found themselves unable to access base game activities like the Prestige Rage and Nightfalls. The community backlash was immediate. Bungie had effectively paywalled existing content, forcing players to buy the DLC just to keep playing the activities they had been grinding since launch. It was a disaster, and for many, it felt like the final nail in the coffin. Destiny 2 wasn't just in trouble, it was in full-blown crisis mode. Bungie had a serious problem on its hands, and if they didn't turn things around fast, the game's future looked bleak. At this point, the Destiny community wasn't just frustrated, they were furious. The launch had already left many players disappointed, but Curse of Osiris felt like a breaking point. The outcry was everywhere. Forums, social media, YouTube, players demanded answers. Content creators who had once championed the game were now openly criticizing Bungie, calling Destiny 2 a hollow shell of its predecessor. even the most loyal fans were starting to walk away, myself included. Bungie knew they had to act fast. They responded with a developer roadmap, a public commitment to fixing Destiny 2's core issues. The roadmap outlined a series of upcoming changes, sandbox updates to make combat feel more rewarding, new progression systems to bring back meaningful loot grind, and a renewed focus on the depth that had made Destiny 1 so beloved. They promised more transparency, better communication, and a shift in philosophy that would put player feedback front and center. But while the roadmap was a step in the right direction, it wasn't enough on its own. Players needed more than promises. They needed proof that Bungie could actually deliver. That first proof came in March 2018 with the Go Fast update. This was the first major sandbox overhaul, bringing back the speed and intensity that players had missed. Movement was faster, cooldowns were shorter, and weapons packed more punch. It wasn't a complete fix, but it showed that Bungie was listening and willing to make big changes to bring back the Destiny experience fans loved. Still, there was a lot more work to be done. The real turning point wouldn't come until May 2018, when the Warmind expansion launched and Bungie finally started to put words into action. Warmind was a small step in the right direction, but for the first time in months, it felt like Destiny 2 had real momentum. The expansion itself wasn't massive, but it reintroduced key elements that players had been asking for since launch. In-game progression was tweaked, giving players more meaningful rewards for their efforts. And then there was Escalation Protocol, a brutally difficult wave-based horde mode that quickly became one of the best pieces of content in the game. Escalation Protocol was everything Destiny 2 had been missing. Challenging, rewarding, and best of all, social. Players gathered in patrol spaces, teaming up with random guardians to take on increasingly difficult waves of enemies, accumulating in intense boss fights. It wasn't just fun, it was a reminder of what made Destiny special in the first place. Those spontaneous moments of cooperation and chaos that created unforgettable stories. But Warmind wasn't just about the content, it was about what it represented. Bungie was listening. They had heard the backlash, acknowledged their mistakes, and were starting to take real steps toward fixing them. This expansion set the stage for what was to come, proving that Destiny 2 wasn't a lost cause. The real transformation was still ahead, but Warmind was the first sign that Bungie was finally ready to make things right. By the time Solstice of Heroes rolled around, Destiny 2 was finally starting to feel like Destiny again. The event wasn't just about flashy armor and nostalgic missions, it was a celebration of how far the game had come. Players who had stuck around through the roughest months were finally seeing some meaningful improvements. Bungie had taken the criticism seriously, and for the first time since launch, there was real excitement about the future. But the biggest change was still on the horizon. Bungie wasn't just tweaking the game anymore. They were about to make their boldest course correction yet, an expansion that wouldn't just fix Destiny 2, but redefine it. A return to deep RPG elements, a darker, more emotional story, and a major shift in philosophy. That expansion was Forsaken. But that's the story for the next video. So, what can we take away from Destiny 2's first year? Well, it was rough, there's no sugarcoating that. Bungie had made some massive mistakes, ones that nearly lost them the community's entire trust. The game launched with accessibility in mind, but in doing so, it lost much of the depth and replayability that made Destiny 1 thrive. Players felt unheard, the in-game was lacking, and Curse of Osiris nearly sent the game into freefall. But if there's one thing Bungie has proven time and time again, it's that they can adapt. They took the criticism head on, made real changes, and fought to win back their players. Warmind was just the beginning, a signal that they were ready to rebuild, and that's exactly what they did. In the end, Year 1 wasn't just a cautionary tale. It was a signal to players that Bungie is willing to try. It showed that Destiny isn't just a game, it's a constantly evolving experience, shaped by both its developers and its community. Bungie was willing to learn from failure, and that's what keeps this game alive. Because in Destiny, just like in any great story, the struggle is what makes the victory worth it.